What tells you someone is a trashy parent? Parents who aren't in poverty/food insecure feeding their kids absolute junk. No kid should have to live off of snack food and McDonald's. If they're on hard times, that's completely understandable, but sometimes it's just cause the parents themselves are overgrown children and don't want to eat real food/vegetables. I worked with an autistic man who was 27 and still lives with his parents. I moved my hand a little fast once and he flinched pretty hard. It made me recoil because the reaction was so intense. He only works and goes home. Not much room for anybody else to be making him respond that way. Dude's my best friend now, and I'm never going to stop observing from afar. Being phony with their child in a place when they know people are listening. I'm a teacher, and it is so obvious when a person is putting on a show with their child. It's disgusting. The thing is, if you are really close to your kid and talk a lot and spend time together, IT will show, you won't need to have performative moments with them in public. I was at the store once, and this kid, maybe 9, was begging his mom for broccoli and said he loves it, eats it at school, and asked for some, and she refused to buy him broccoli because she doesn't like it. He said she doesn't have to cook it, he likes it raw. She handed him a giant-sized candy bar and said if he wanted a treat, she'd buy him chocolate. The kid was so disappointed. Daughter-in-law of a friend. The grandmother buys the kids clothes, but the mom always dresses them like they dug them out of the lost and found bin. Mismatched, torn, stained, ill-fitting. Mom doesn't dress like that. Kids are all now old enough to dress themselves, and I've noticed they are starting to dress better. Projecting their own dislike of something on their children to their disadvantage. Oh, they don't like vegetables. Wrong, they never had any because you dislike them and you do not cook them any vegetables. Ever. Oh, they don't like to read. How are they supposed to? If they never saw a book or a library from inside. I have an acquaintance who thinks like this, pretty maddening to listen to her. Punishing adult children when they don't obey. Example. Years ago, my MIL was about to get a promotion in Eastern Star. I think she was going to be named Grand Matron or something. I'm not part of that organization. The ceremony was a fairly formal one, held in a banquet hall, beginning at 8 p.m. MIL insisted that everyone in the family attend, including grandchildren. She wanted everyone to join her on the stage for her big moment. Now, at the time, our daughters were very young, 4 and 2. Not only was this very close to their bedtime, my husband and I knew they'd get bored and cranky, so we said it would just be husband attending. MIL was furious and kept insisting that everyone had to be there. We were adamant that that wouldn't be happening. Sorry. During the ceremony, MIL introduced all of her family members to the audience. Oh wait, did I say all? Somehow, mysteriously, she forgot to mention husband. But I'm sure that was just a coincidence, despite the fact that he's her firstborn. Since you said trashy, I think of all the parents I know who spend money on brand name clothes for their kids, Instagram moments, and motorcycle/cars when they are old enough to drive, but don't save any money for their education or other things that actually help them get started in life. Trying to be the cool parent instead of the responsible one. This is pretty specific, but I once had a co-worker come in and complain that she was completely broke and was unable to feed her 2 kids. I think they were about 7 and 10 at the time. We worked at a salon at the time, so she would get tips after each client, usually ranging from $3 to $7. My point here is that after 3 clients, she would have had enough money for food for her kids. Instead, I watched her walk over to the liquor store and purchase multiple scratchers and a pack of cigarettes. She also went to Del Taco on her lunch break. Not asking why. I see so many interactions where parents reflexively say stop, no, quiet, stop whining, without first asking why. Kids are experiencing everything for the first time. We've got to have some compassion. When they lose a balloon or are denied a treat, that's an encounter with grief and loss. They're navigating a complicated world, and their own rules and minds and bodies are constantly changing. That shit must be hard. We shouldn't baby them, but we should listen for when it's a bigger issue than a dropped ice cream. Telling them they won't like something. Let the kid try. I get not spending a lot on things they don't like, but taste buds change, and that really sets kids up for a lifetime of limited diet and stifled curiosity. My elderly next-door neighbor passed away a few months ago, and other neighbors, townhouse complex, so lots of us in close proximity, have commented on how his daughters just weren't here enough. I said, did you hear him screaming at the every time they came over? Just imagine what it was like to live with him. I have a friend who works at an old folks' home, and she complains constantly about how mean and awful a lot of them are. Then she turns around and complains about how their kids never visit them. And isn't that just awful? Can you imagine raising your kids and then they just stick you in a home and forget about you? I had to point out to her several times that a lot of the mean ones she complains about probably didn't just get mean in their old age. If taking care of them now is awful, imagine being raised by them. I used to live next door to a really nice older woman who was physically disabled, was poor, had trouble caring for herself, and was on government assistance to help her survive. No shade, just explaining her situation. She didn't really throw out any red flags until she mentioned that she had 2 children who no longer spoke to her, and she just had no idea why they would do that to poor old her. She had never done a thing to deserve that. She'd been such a good mother, happy face to you. My husband bought it hook, line, and sinker. I had to explain once we got inside that this was a giant red flag, that she'd been hugely abusive, and the kids had cut her off for their own safety/mental health, and that we should cut back on our neighborly interactions and be more standoffish with her. Because I did not want to be pulled into what was likely to be a manipulative and narcissistic relationship, and we had a young daughter, who she always lavished with compliments. My ex-wife has this problem. I stay out of my kids' relationship with her, but it makes me sad knowing they don't get to have a good relationship with their mother, and she absolutely acts like she doesn't get why. Hopefully someday, she has some real growth and can do the work to repair that with them. Sadly, such people rarely mature enough to accept their mistakes or their role in the relationship breakdown. They would rather blame God himself and accept that they were wrong. This question has been asked before, and someone said, their adult children don't speak to them. I appreciate that you added in. They don't know why. My brother has gone in sea with my parents and I, and while my parents weren't the best, most emotionally intelligent, and they still drive me nuts, they don't deserve to be put on a list of trashy or terrible parents. My brother has emotional issues and reacted poorly to them, putting their first ever boundaries out in writing for him at the advice of a therapist. I was on the bus once with a lady who told me none of her 8 kids have spoken to her in over a decade. She started talking about how she saved money on Christmas presents though, since she doesn't have to buy anything for her grandkids now, and what spoiled brats all her children are. It was very obvious from our short conversation why her kids want nothing to do with her. When I moved back home at age 24 after a breakup, my parents offered me an inflatable pool raft to sleep on. Did that for a couple months before noticing a neighbor was moving and selling some furniture. My dad bought an ugly and uncomfortable pull-out sofa bed for $75. I slept on that for a few more months before finding a room to rent across town. My dad was charging me $300 a month to sleep on the sofa bed, and this new place was going to cost me $600 a month. When I asked to borrow the sofa bed until I could get a real bed, he told me no. I slept on the inflatable raft for 3 more months, but never had to live under my dad's roof again. My mother never saw me as romantic or sexual competition, but there was some strange competitive aspect there. She always insisted, even when watching the nurse measure me, that I was 1 inch shorter than I am because I was the same height as me and I'm 5 feet 2 inches. Like I wasn't allowed to be an inch taller. She took me to the salon every month and had them take thinning shears to my head because my hair was just so poofy and frizzy. She always hated her thin, straight hair and refused to acknowledge that I had thick, curly hair. She made me brush it every morning until I looked like Rosanna. She criticized my clothes, my decorating, my furniture, my baby names. She tried to name my baby. She didn't approve of who I was marrying, but then almost immediately after the wedding, she started telling him how inept I was and how he was going to have to take care of everything because I was just so flaky. She's dead, and it killed me when she passed, but there's a huge weight off my shoulders not having the thread of parental disapproval hanging over me. My mother does this, where she brings up embarrassing childhood memories of mine that I'd long forgotten about to try to get a laugh or embarrass me. I'm 34 now, and the depth I've had to go to in an attempt to get her to stop this is wild. I've basically boiled it down to one rule with her. If you're going to bring up my childhood, it can only be of a time I was happy. One of the quotes from my dad that's in my memory forever is, "You're a pain, but you're not glass." Rather than just explain to a child that it's important to be aware of other people's space, I was expected to understand what a pane of glass was and how it related to the perceived lesson that I was in the way, blocking the TV, etc. It's been a lifelong struggle to not resort to cutting sarcasm to make points because that's how I was spoken to as a kid and, well, my entire life. I was a bit of a messy kid, but not on purpose. When I was around 8 or 9, my parents staged my room, taking all my stuff and toys out, piling on the floor in bed, then took a picture to show all their friends, "Look at this, she can't keep her room clean." I'm in my 40s, and I still carry shame around my inability to manage small clutter. I can as well. You're okay. Part of my improvement started with buying less stuff, throw in the recycle bin whatever I don't use and stays around too much, and stop carrying. By the way, bins are great in general. Don't worry, nothing to be ashamed of. Shame should be a consequence of something bad, not clutter. I was getting fitted for a new pair of glasses, and my dad humorously quipped to the optometrist about how big my nose was. I was 8. My parents would also walk out every embarrassing childhood story they could think of whenever they met a friend or boyfriend. I was always needing to be taken down a peg for some reason. I know a woman who kept having babies until she got her son, and then one more daughter for good measure. Her eldest daughter was basically the second mom until she started having babies, so now that responsibility moved to the second daughter. Note that mom's final baby is 6 months older than her grandson. There's this woman on TikTok who makes content about how she has 6 kids and is pregnant with her 7th, and they live in a 1-bedroom apartment. Mom and dad get the main bedroom, so they can make more kids obviously, and all the kids are stacked in the living room. The comments go wild, and I love reading them. Hey, so this is definitely a choice. This is the one. I spent my childhood terrified of my mom, and my adulthood believing I was just a dramatic kid. Then my mom started fostering a relative's child. I watched her bend down to whisper in the child's ear and watched him flinch away from her. The look on his face was pure terror. Then I realized that no, I wasn't a dramatic kid. My mom sucks. This was my home growing up. I remember in elementary school, I forgot my jacket on the playground. When I got home and my mother asked where it was, I realized and immediately panicked. We went back to look for it, but I, trembling with tears in my eyes, couldn't find it. It couldn't have been worth more than $20. This was back in the late 70s, but I was terrified about how my father would react when he found out. All these years later, it sticks with me how that was indicative of living under his thumb. My siblings and I all have these specific random memories of the terror he'd inflict on us. When I eulogized him a handful of years ago, I had to search for nice things to say, and they was very obviously hollow. Can't say I miss him. When my daughter was 3, we were at a grocery store and she had to use the potty. As I was lifting her back in the cart, she accidentally kicked a display of metal water bottles, sending them crashing to the ground. A nearby employee rushed over and she looked terrified, wide eyes and all. I put my forehead against hers and said, "No big deal. It was a mistake and everyone makes mistakes. We'll pick them up." At preschool the next day, she drew a picture of 2 people with a speech bubble with squiggly lines inside. I asked her what it said, and she said, "Thanks for saying no big deal." She's almost 12, and it's always been important that fear is never part of her life. I coach cheer, and we have a little girl on the squad who had her pom-poms accidentally taken by another girl after practice one day. When her dad came to pick her up, she started bawling her eyes out that her mommy is going to be mad. It was such an extreme overreaction to something that truly wasn't her fault. We tried to explain to her that it was going to be okay and that we'd get her palms back at the next practice, but she was inconsolable. I felt so bad for her after that, and I kind of treated her extra nice at practice BC. I imagine people don't treat her very nice at home. That same girl was complaining of her ankle hurting at practice one day, so I let her sit out and rest to avoid injuring herself. The next day at the game, she wasn't putting weight on it and kept saying it hurt, so I once again pulled her and had her come sit in the sidelines so she wouldn't injure herself. When her parents noticed she was sitting out, they started screaming at her to get back on the field. I told her it was okay and that she could sit out, but they kept yelling at her and then at me to put her in. Finally, the cheer director came over and told her to get back on the field. BC, her parents were causing a scene. It was insane to me, but yeah, those were some trashy parents. I remember breaking some vase and being terrified to tell me mom. This isn't because she was a bad parent, but just child me being afraid of doing something bad. I did tell her before she found out, and she just said something like, "Oh, that sucks, but shit happens. Please be more careful in the future." This is why I don't tell my parents anything. The one time I confided in my mother as a teen, she made me feel worse, and then I overheard her sharing the incident with her sister on a lengthy phone call. It's made me so aware of my kids having a right to privacy. My father also thinks it doesn't count if he tells certain people something he's been asked to keep to himself. Now he wonders why his adult kids don't really keep him up to date on our lives. I'm guilty of that. I had 2 special needs kids, both with conditions I never even heard of, so I shared in the moms group that this isn't an ordinary delay, it's a condition, or posted general info when we were doing fundraisers. At one point, I would even post a fact a day during that Conditions Awareness Month, and I found that people were excited to learn in small, easy tidbits, and even people asking me to discuss other conditions. In the end, people knew that they were different as kids, got to see how much therapy, physical/speech types, not mental, helped as they got older, and still occasionally say, "Oh, my friend has a daughter that has that condition you talked about on Facebook. Is it okay if I give them your info?" When I was 10, I had a friend who had the worst hygiene I'd ever encountered at that point. She had no idea how to take care of herself. I tried to explain in detail how to shower, brush teeth, how often, etc. But it wasn't sinking in, so I just had her do it with me, lol. We'd shower together all the time. I showed her by example, and she greatly improved. And teeth too. I remember she'd come over and have bad breath, and be a bit ripe, and I'd say something like, "Hey, you know what I feel like doing? Let's go brush our teeth and take a shower." And we'd go do that and have a great time together, LMAO. It was the beginning of me having an affinity for shower buddies, lol. This is a long-term consequence of neglect people don't talk about enough. I've had friends in adulthood who don't know how to brush their teeth properly or how often they're supposed to wash/change their clothes because no one taught them. And it's harder to learn and remember automatically when you're older. Kind of like language acquisition. Totally. It takes time and effort to teach your kids to brush their teeth, shower regularly, use face wash, comb their hair, use deodorant, etc. No one is born knowing these things. Many times I would have rather sat on the couch than get my kids to brush their teeth, but that's just part of good parenting. It's absolutely astounding how many kids I grew up with had parents who smoked in a closed space with their children. There's a family video of my husband as a toddler and his mother's cigarette ashes fell on him. They taught him to clap like it was confetti every time the ash fell from the cigarette near him. My mom would smoke in the house and the car. I'm allergic to cigarette smoke and woke up with the sniffles, a sore throat, and a headache every day until I moved out. In the winter, she'd leave the car window cracked to flick the ashes out, and all the snow and cold air would blow all over me, often with the discarded ashes in tow. No way to count how many times I told my mom she was flicking ashes on me, and she'd say, "No, she isn't." I checked myself into a psych stay for severe postpartum when my oldest was 14 months. They asked me, "Who's in your emotional support system?" And I gave a short list. The nurse asked, "Why not your son?" I said because he's 14 months old. She insisted that he was 14 years old and was also unhappy with my response to that. No, he's a toddler. Even if he wasn't, it's not right to lean on a teen like that either. I left against medical advice that day. I used to work retail, and there was one customer who would come in often with her toddler son. I can't remember what his name was, but she would leave him unattended in the store where he would be climbing the shelves, etc. Her nickname for him was my lover. I sincerely hope that's as sickening as that got, and that the kid didn't suffer any actual physical/sexual abuse. My husband and I witnessed a spat between two boys at our local park recently. The older kid, Easton, hit his younger brother, Maverick, right in the middle of his spine with his fist. It was a hard thud and could be heard all across the park. The mom, who'd been under the pavilion the whole time, far from the spat, came over, not in a rush, to see what the boys were fighting about. Easton yelled that Maverick didn't want to share. So mom yells at Maverick, who is completely inconsolable at this point. Well then, that is what you get. Those two aren't regulars at our park, so we don't know them personally, but the ages are approximate. 11 and 7 if I had to guess. All children deserve parents, but not all parents deserve children. As a parent to a 3-year-old autistic child, thank you for watching out for him. The world needs more people like you who understand. If the parents raise their hand to him, they're the biggest scumbags ever. Autistic people are so much more than what people perceive, and they need gentle understanding. The head of the Dems in my county got arrested for a car full of rep signs he stole. He deflected the blame pretty hard with stuff like signs were blocking his, and they did it last election. The whole event was funny no matter what team you are on. His mugshot appeared on local FB pages multiple times. The kids who are always sticky or have snot dried or fresh, big red flag. All kids get dirty or sticky sometimes. They should not be dirty and sticky all the time. Dirty socks and feet in the middle of winter. I get that some people run around barefoot when it's warm, but how are you so dirty when the snow is on the ground? I work in an ER. I've seen some trash. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.